Hi everyone, I'm James, and I'm here to explain how Saudi Arabia has a parity between its GDP and its resources. A parity, in case you don't know, is defined by the Oxford English Dictionary as a state or condition of being equal, or in this case, being in similar states, as both the resources and GDP of Saudi Arabia are strong. Some facts about Saudi Arabia's resources are that the country's exports are almost solely based on their production of oil. Also, Saudi Arabia exports around 7.6 million barrels of oil per day and produces over 10.5 million barrels per day. In order to run the machinery that is involved in the production of this oil, a certain amount of the product must be consumed within the country. How much, you ask? Well, Saudi Arabia consumes over 2.6 million barrels of oil per day, and if you do the math, almost all of the oil produced in one day that is not used by the production machinery is exported to other countries. Saudi Arabia has a very good trade establishment between its imports and exports. The country ensures that its GDP will continue to grow as it brings in over $350 billion per year through exports, and only sends out roughly $106 billion per year in imports. The country's growth rate at the end of the year, at the end of the 2011 fiscal year, was 6.5%, which is up from 2010's 4.1% and 2009's minimal 0.1% growth rate. It is clear that Saudi Arabia is increasing rapidly economically, but how are the country's unemployment rates? With a labor force of 7.6 million people, the country's unemployment rate is 10.9%. That is 760,000 people unemployed. The country's inflation rate is also not very good at a slowly declining 5%. This is better than 2010's 5.4%, but the fact that the country has both a high unemployment rate and a high inflation rate means that the nation is dependent on its exports to keep its GDP high. And in a global recession, the country will lose money and will not be able to keep its GDP high any longer. Saudi Arabia's labor force is majorly based in the services district, with 71.9% of the labor force working in this field. There is also 21.4% of the labor force working in the industrial field, and only 6.7% working in agriculture. These are interesting statistics because although almost 3/4 of the nation's labor force works in services, less than 1/3 of the nation's GDP comes from that sector. In fact, the majority of Saudi Arabia's GDP comes from the industrial sector, which only has 21.4% of the nation's labor force working in it, but brings in 67.6% of the country's GDP. Agriculture also, of course, does not hold a large percentage of either the labor force or the GDP, and does not have much of an impact on the country as a whole. Since Saudi Arabia does not have a strong agricultural sector due to the terrain of the country, it must import almost all of the raw food products necessary to feed a nation. Luckily, the country has such a strong export with oil that the need for imports is outweighed by the constant flow of exports. Saudi Arabia has a group of very strong trade partners that keep its GDP booming. In the field of exports, Saudi Arabia sends 14.3% of its exports to Japan, 13.1% to China, 13% to the United States, 8.8% to South Korea, 8.3% to India, and 4.5% to Singapore. These are the country's main trade partners and receive the majority of its exports. All of these countries have fairly high GDP as well, and many are in great need of Saudi Arabia's oil because they are industrial countries themselves. The nation also has strong trade partners for its imports of raw foodstuffs, cars, chemicals, and textiles. 12% of the country's imports are received from the United States, 11.1% from China, 7.1% from Germany, 6.9% from Japan, 6.1% from France, 4.7% from India, and 4.2% from South Korea. Saudi Arabia exports far more than it imports, but it is still imperative for the country to have strong trade partners in both fields of trade, and according to these statistics it does, and will be well off with its trade if it can maintain these partners. A monarch of domestic descent governs Saudi Arabia, and the country gained its independence from the Commonwealth in 1932. Since then, its industrial output has expanded exponentially. Its government makes it such that quick decisions can be made without having to wait on issues or bills, as they go through a long process of legal regulation. This can be both positive and a negative for the country, as its expansion is easily obtained and is increasing quickly, but at the same time its level of poverty is also expanding and increasing. 82% of the population lives in urban conditions, and therefore most likely povertous conditions, for those low as 10.9% of the population that is unemployed. Sadly, the country has a statistic of about 1 doctor for every 1,000 people in the country, and only 2 hospital beds for every 1,000 people. The country's healthcare system is not strong in any way, but this is a sacrifice that must be made for such rapid expansion of the nation's GDP. Saudi Aramco, officially the Saudi Arabian Oil Company, is the national oil company of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Aramco was estimated to be worth $781 billion in 2005, making it the world's most valuable company, and 80% more valuable than ExxonMobil, the second largest public company in the world. This is a domestically owned company and brings ludicrous amounts of money into the nation. Saudi Aramco has both the largest proven crude oil reserves, at more than 260 billion barrels in that reserve, and the largest daily oil production. Saudi Aramco operates the largest single hydrocarbon network, the Master Gas System. Its yearly production is 7.9 billion barrels of oil, and it managed over 100 oil and gas fields in Saudi Arabia, including 279 trillion standard cubic feet of natural gas reserves. Oh hey, didn't see you there. Well, in closing, although Saudi Arabia doesn't have a very good healthcare system, nor are its inflation and unemployment rates any good, it still has a parity between its resources and its GDP. Both are very strong and are ranked fairly high in comparison to other countries around the world. The kingdom's government allows for quick decisions in the goal for expansion, but also overlooks its citizens' well-being in order to achieve this goal. The country may have a strong GDP, but in terms of any human development index that takes the wealth and quality of a country beyond just the numbers involved with its economy, Saudi Arabia does not have a very good standard of living. Thanks for watching.